My car crash should have killed me, but God gave me a second chance. Ex-Atheist testimony. I grew up in a home where God was never mentioned. Not at the dinner table, not before bed, not even on Sundays when other families were going to church. My parents weren't hostile to religion, they just treated it like a relic of the past, something people used to cling to before science and progress explained the world. We didn't own a Bible, or if we did, it was buried somewhere collecting dust. My earliest memories of faith were hearing kids at school talk about God, and I would sit there quietly, confused, wondering why they believed in something so invisible. To me, it felt unnecessary, like believing in fairy tales. When I was little, I remember asking my mom once, "Why don't we pray like the other families?" She just smiled and said, "Because we don't need that. We take care of ourselves." That answer stuck with me. It made me think that prayer was only for those who couldn't handle life on their own. In my young mind, prayer looked like weakness. I thought real strength was found in knowledge, in studying hard, in learning how the world really worked. I admired scientists and explorers, not pastors or preachers. To me, religion was just another old story people told themselves to feel better. At school, kids sometimes invited me to church, but I always declined. I didn't want to waste my Sunday mornings sitting in a building listening to someone talk about rules and invisible beings. Instead, I'd rather stay home, play video games, or ride my bike around the neighborhood. My friends who went to church always seemed so sheltered, like they weren't allowed to have fun. I told myself I was freer than them, that my life was better because I didn't have to worry about sin or guilt. Even as a child, I carried that sense of superiority, thinking I was already smarter than the church kids. The first time I ever heard a prayer in person was at a sleepover at a friend's house. His family bowed their heads and thanked God before dinner. I sat there awkwardly, peeking with one eye open, wondering why they were talking to the ceiling. I tried not to laugh, but inside, I thought it was the strangest thing I had ever seen. On the way home the next day, I told my mom about it and she laughed, saying, "People believe all kinds of things, just don't get sucked into it." That reinforced my view that religion was silly, a distraction from real life. As I grew older, I began mocking faith more openly. I would roll my eyes when people said, "Thank God" or "God bless you." I thought it was childish, like believing in Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny. I didn't understand how intelligent people could look at the world, with all its science and evidence, and still believe in a God they couldn't see. To me, that was the ultimate contradiction. If something wasn't proven, if it couldn't be measured or explained, then it wasn't real. That was the philosophy I absorbed, and I carried it proudly like a badge. My father used to say, "Son, remember, you make your own future. No one up there is going to hand it to you." He worked hard, long hours, and built his life from nothing, so I admired him. His example showed me that discipline and effort were all a person needed to survive. If someone failed, it was their own fault, not the lack of God's help. That mindset shaped me deeply. Faith was unnecessary. People needed to stop looking up at the sky for answers and start taking responsibility for their own lives. That became my motto, even as a child. Religion, in my eyes, was for the weak. That's what I believed with every fiber of my being. I would watch kids cry during hard times and then hear their parents say, "Let's pray about it." I didn't understand how that helped. How could whispering words into the air fix anything? To me, the only real solutions came from action, from doing something, not waiting for some invisible God to intervene. I told myself I'd never waste my time believing in something I couldn't see or touch. Looking back, I realize how cold I sounded even at a young age. But at the time, I thought I was being logical. I thought I was better than the ones who clung to religion. I wore my disbelief like armor, convinced that it made me stronger, sharper, more independent. While other kids were memorizing Bible verses in Sunday school, I was memorizing science facts from library books. I thought I was preparing myself for the real world, while they were preparing themselves for fairy tales. It never occurred to me that maybe I was missing something. My heart felt full of pride, even as a child. I didn't notice the quiet emptiness that sometimes crept in when I was alone. I told myself that emptiness was just boredom, something everyone felt. But deep down, I think I knew there was a space inside me that knowledge and logic couldn't quite fill. Still, I ignored it. I buried it under the belief that I didn't need God, that no one did. That was the foundation I built my life on from the very beginning. So by the time I reached adolescence, my identity as a non-believer was already solid. I didn't just doubt God, I dismissed him entirely. Religion was for the weak, the lost, the ones who couldn't face life's harsh realities. I told myself I was different, I was strong, I was independent, and I believed that would always be enough. As I grew into my teenage years, that quiet disbelief from childhood hardened into something much stronger. It wasn't just that I didn't believe in God. I began to feel proud of it. I carried myself like I was smarter than anyone who still clung to faith. Whenever friends at school talked about church or youth group, I would smirk and roll my eyes, pretending to be above it all. In my mind, they were wasting their time with stories and rituals while I was focused on reality, on things that actually mattered. I thought rejecting religion made me bold, independent, and intellectually superior. I loved science classes, and I used them like weapons in arguments. If someone mentioned God, I would quickly jump in with evolution physics or the Big Bang Theory, as if those were ultimate trump cards that proved I was right. I would say, if there really was a God, why would he need to hide? Why wouldn't he show himself clearly to everyone? The more I asked these questions, the more confident I felt that I had outsmarted all the so-called believers. My favorite line was always, "When you die, it's over. There's nothing else." I repeated it so often it became like a motto to me. By then, my circle of friends knew where I stood. Some avoided faith conversations around me because they didn't want to deal with my sarcasm. Others tried to challenge me, but I loved that. It gave me the chance to show off how logical I was. I liked to debate, not because I was searching for truth, but because I loved the feeling of being right. Each time I made someone stumble in their explanation, I felt a rush of pride. It didn't matter if I really understood everything myself. What mattered was proving them wrong. My teachers noticed it too. I remember one of my science teachers pulling me aside once and saying, "You're sharp, but don't let arrogance get in your way." I brushed it off. To me, arrogance was confidence, and confidence was strength. If I was cocky, it just meant I was sure of myself, and I was sure of one thing above all else, that God did not exist. Anyone who believed otherwise was simply refusing to face reality. At home, my parents supported that mindset. They didn't exactly celebrate my disbelief, but they reinforced it in subtle ways. My dad often reminded me, "Life is what you make of it. Nobody's coming to save you." My mom would roll her eyes whenever she saw religious people on TV. Together, those little lessons built up my sense of superiority. I wasn't just rejecting God. I was convinced that people who believed in him were weak, naive, and misguided. That pride grew inside me like a shield, making me feel untouchable. I also started to enjoy mocking faith publicly. On social media, if someone posted a Bible verse, I might reply with a sarcastic comment or a science meme. In class, if a teacher mentioned God in literature, I'd crack jokes under my breath. My identity was tied to being the smart one, the one who wasn't fooled by old traditions. I thought it made me brave, someone who could stand against the crowd. In reality, it just made me blind. But at the time, all I saw was how much smarter I was than everyone else. When tragedy struck classmates or neighbors, I noticed how quickly people turned to prayer. That made me even more dismissive. I told myself prayer was just a coping mechanism, nothing more. I would mutter, "They're talking to the air because they can't deal with reality." Instead of compassion, I felt annoyance. Their hope seemed fake to me, and I thought my cold honesty was more respectable. My heart was becoming harder with each passing year, and pride was the stone wall I built around it. Even though I acted confident, there were moments when I would lie in bed at night and wonder, what if I'm wrong? What if there really is something after death? But I would quickly shut those thoughts down. To admit even a sliver of doubt felt like weakness, and I hated weakness. So I repeated my motto like a mantra: when you die, it's over. There's nothing else. Saying it out loud gave me comfort, as if I could force it to be true just by believing it hard enough. That phrase shaped my worldview completely. Every decision, every argument, every thought was filtered through it. If life ended with death, then the only thing that mattered was living it for myself, chasing success, and never wasting time on religion. I thought this mindset made me free, but in reality, it chained me to pride. I didn't realize yet that pride would soon lead me straight into a collision, literally, that would shake everything I believed about life and death. By the time I reached adulthood, I had perfected this intellectual arrogance. I was the one who scoffed when someone mentioned miracles. I was the one who shut down conversations with a smirk and a clever line. I thought nothing could ever change my mind, that I was too smart, too logical, too strong. But deep inside, without knowing it, I was preparing myself for the moment when all my beliefs would be shattered in an instant. As I stepped into adulthood, I carried my disbelief like a shield. By then, it wasn't just a phase or teenage rebellion. It was my identity. I had a steady job, good friends, and the beginnings of a career that gave me pride. To the outside world, I looked like I had it all together. I was independent, ambitious, and unshaken by things that troubled other people. Whenever conversations about faith came up, I would laugh them off, saying, "That's not for me. I don't need religion to live my life." And honestly, at that stage, I believed it completely. My job became the center of my life. I loved the structure of it. The deadlines, the numbers, the tangible results. It made sense. It was measurable. Unlike faith, my work gave me proof of progress, promotions, paychecks, and recognition. I trusted in my own abilities and believed that with enough effort I could build the life I wanted. There was no room for miracles or divine intervention in my mind. Everything I achieved was because of me, and I wore that like a badge of honor. Money became my comfort. Having a stable income felt like having control over my future. I told myself that as long as I had enough money, I'd be safe, secure, and free. My friends would sometimes thank God for their blessings, but I always thanked myself. I worked hard. I earned it. I deserved it. That mindset was my foundation. I didn't see money as a tool. I saw it as protection. I thought it was all the security I'd ever need. I also surrounded myself with people who thought like me. My closest friends were practical, logical, and just as dismissive of faith as I was. Together, we reinforced each other's disbelief. If someone mentioned church or God, we'd make jokes, rolling our eyes and moving on. It was easier to laugh at faith than to take it seriously. Being in that environment gave me confidence. I didn't feel outnumbered anymore. Instead, I felt like part of an enlightened group that knew better than the rest. Science was my religion. I didn't call it that, but that's exactly what it was for me. I trusted studies, statistics, and research the way others trusted scripture. If science couldn't explain something, I assumed it simply hadn't yet. That faith in logic filled the role God might have played in someone else's life. It gave me answers, or at least the illusion of answers, and that was enough for me. I thought it made me wise. I thought it made me free. When hardships came, because they always do, I never once turned to prayer. Instead, I doubled down on work, leaned on reason, or distracted myself with entertainment. I told myself I didn't need comfort from some higher power. I had my own coping mechanisms, alcohol at times, staying busy, or simply denying my feelings. My confidence was in myself, and I refused to admit that maybe I wasn't enough. To me, admitting that would have been the same as admitting God might exist, and I couldn't do that. The more stable my life looked on the outside, the more I clung to the idea that I was in control. People at work respected me, my friends enjoyed my company, and I never had to rely on anyone beyond myself. That illusion of control fed my pride. I told myself I didn't need God because I had already built a good life without Him. I didn't realize that all of it could vanish in a single moment, and that the control I thought I had was nothing but smoke. Deep down, though, I sometimes felt a small emptiness. I wouldn't have admitted it then, but I knew something was missing. Despite my achievements, I still had nights when I felt restless, nights when money and success didn't seem to fill the silence. But instead of exploring that feeling, I buried it under distractions. I convinced myself it was just stress, just part of being an adult. I told myself everyone feels that way, and it had nothing to do with faith. Whenever people tried to share their testimonies with me, I brushed them off. That's just your imagination, I'd say, or science will explain it eventually. I couldn't stand the idea that they might have experienced something real that I hadn't, so I clung to skepticism even harder. It was safer to believe in nothing than to risk believing in something and being wrong. Pride kept me locked in that mindset, and I refused to question it. Looking back now, I see that I built my life on a fragile foundation. My trust was in money, logic, and myself. And while it worked for a while, I had no idea how quickly it could all fall apart. I didn't know then that one single night, one accident, would bring my entire world crashing down and force me to confront everything I thought I knew. But at that stage of my life, I felt untouchable. I thought I was secure. I thought I was in control. I used to think people of faith were simply weak. That was my honest belief. When I saw colleagues praying before meals or posting Bible verses on social media, I rolled my eyes. To me, they were clinging to something outdated, something humanity should have outgrown long ago. I thought I was smarter than them. I even made jokes about how they needed an imaginary friend to get through the day. At the time, I wasn't just indifferent to faith, I actively mocked it. I remember a coworker once sharing that God had helped her through a tough time, and I laughed under my breath. Later, I made a sarcastic comment to another colleague, asking if God had also helped her pay the bills that month. People would give me uncomfortable smiles, but I didn't care. I felt clever when I could poke holes in their faith. In my mind, I was freeing them from superstition, doing them a favor by exposing the truth. I prided myself on being the voice of reason in a world I thought was full of blind believers. When debates came up about science and religion, I was the first to speak, quoting statistics and articles I had read. I thought I was enlightened, that I had risen above primitive ideas of heaven and hell. Every time someone tried to share their testimony, I cut them off, saying, "That's just coincidence. Life happens. Don't make it about God." The truth is, my ridicule gave me a sense of power. It made me feel superior. Deep down, I was afraid of the possibility that they might be right and I might be wrong. But rather than confront that fear, I hid it behind sarcasm. I told myself I was being rational, but I was really just protecting my pride. Mocking faith was easier than asking questions I didn't want to answer. I also feared vulnerability. Believing in God felt like weakness to me. It meant admitting that I didn't have control, that I wasn't enough on my own. So I doubled down on my skepticism. Every time life got hard, I worked harder to prove that I didn't need God. And when other people turned to prayer, I turned to logic or distraction, anything but faith. Looking back, I realized how harsh I was. I hurt people without even realizing it. Some of my co-workers stopped talking about their beliefs around me because they didn't want to be mocked. At the time, I celebrated that as a win. I thought I was shutting down ignorance. Now I see that I was just silencing voices that could have helped me see the truth sooner. What I didn't know then was that my pride was setting me up for a fall. Life has a way of humbling you, of breaking down the walls you think will protect you forever. I was so sure I was untouchable that nothing could shake my convictions. I didn't know how quickly that would change when something truly beyond my control happened. When I look back now, I see that mocking faith was my way of running from God. I didn't just disbelieve, I resisted. I fought against the very idea of him. I wanted to live without accountability, without the possibility that there was someone greater than me. That kind of pride always comes with a cost. It's painful to admit, but part of me enjoyed seeing believers doubt when they faced hardship. I thought it proved me right. I thought it showed that faith was nothing but wishful thinking. But that attitude would come back to haunt me later, when I was the one facing hardship and had no one to turn to. I used to think faith was for the weak. Now I know it takes incredible strength to believe, to trust in something greater than yourself when everything around you is falling apart. But back then, I wasn't ready to learn that lesson. Back then, I was still laughing, completely unaware that life was about to put me on my knees. It was supposed to be just another night. The kind of night I had lived 100 times before. I had stayed late at work, caught up in endless meetings that felt important at the time. Afterwards, I joined a few colleagues for drinks at a bar near the office. We laughed, we complained about work, we toasted to nothing in particular. I had a couple of beers. Nothing excessive, I told myself. I felt relaxed, confident, and ready to call it a day. When I stepped outside, the night air was cool and the streets were quiet. I remember looking up at the sky for a second, feeling oddly content. There was no warning, no sense of doom hanging over me. I jingled my keys, walked to my car, and told myself I deserved to get home and sleep. I didn't even consider calling a cab or waiting to sober up more. My judgment felt clear. I had driven in worse conditions before, or so I thought. As soon as I started the engine, music filled the car. I cranked it up, rolled the window down, and felt that false sense of control that only pride can give. I was thinking about my next big project at work, about bills I needed to pay, about what I'd have for breakfast the next morning. Life felt normal, predictable. I had no idea that in a matter of minutes everything was about to change forever. The road home was familiar, too familiar. I could almost drive it on autopilot. Streetlights glowed softly in the distance, and the hum of the engine lulled me into a strange calm. I wasn't reckless, but I wasn't cautious either. I pressed a little harder on the gas pedal, just enough to feel the car respond. I remember thinking about a conversation I'd had earlier that night, where someone mentioned praying before bed. I had laughed and said, "That's cute. I'll stick with Netflix." The further I drove, the quieter the world seemed to get. The streets were nearly empty, and I felt like I was the only person awake. My thoughts drifted, as they always did on long drives. I thought about my daughter, about how I wanted to give her everything I never had. I thought about my wife, and how I sometimes took her for granted. None of those thoughts felt heavy, just passing reflections. I had no idea they would be the last calm thoughts before the storm. As I approached a long stretch of road, I remember feeling a little drowsy. Not enough to worry me, but just enough to blink a bit slower. I turned up the radio, hoping to shake off the fatigue. I told myself, just 10 more minutes and you'll be home. The music was upbeat, the night was quiet, and for a moment everything felt perfectly under control. Then, out of nowhere, something shifted. Maybe it was a shadow crossing the road, maybe just a trick of the light, but my focus snapped. My hands gripped the wheel tighter. My heart started to race, as if it knew something I didn't. I shook my head, telling myself to stay alert. The strange thing is, in that moment, I felt a chill, like someone had just whispered my name, even though I was alone in the car. I brushed it off. "You're just tired," I told myself, trying to laugh at the thought. But my chest felt heavy, like a quiet warning was hanging in the air. It was one of those moments when everything seems to slow down, and for a second, you become hyper-aware of every sound, every breath. It felt like time itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Just a few minutes from home, I hit a curve I had taken countless times before, but this time my hand slipped slightly on the wheel. The car veered just a little, enough to jolt me back to full alertness. My heart pounded in my chest. I cursed under my breath and straightened the car. I had no idea that what happened next would be the turning point of my life. As I came out of the curve, headlights appeared in the opposite lane, much closer than they should have been. I didn't have time to think. I just knew that in a fraction of a second, my world might end. And in that split second, for the first time in my life, I felt fear like I had never felt before. The kind of fear that strips you down and makes you realize you're not in control at all. The moment felt unreal. 1 second I was holding the steering wheel, and the next there were blinding headlights coming straight at me. There was no time to react, no time to think. I slammed the brakes, but it was too late. The sound of metal on metal was deafening as the other car collided with mine. Everything became a violent blur, glass shattering, tires screeching, the world spinning out of control. The force of the impact threw me forward, the seatbelt biting into my chest. My head hit the side window, and for a brief second, there was nothing but silence. Then pain, sharp, burning pain, shot through my body. My ears rang, my hands were trembling, and I could smell smoke and gasoline. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the car. I tried to move, but I was pinned. My legs felt heavy, my vision blurry. The dashboard was crushed against me, and I could taste blood in my mouth. The world outside the car seemed far away, like I was watching everything through thick glass. I could hear faint voices shouting, but they sounded distant, distorted like echoes in a dream. For a moment I thought, this is it. This is how I die. Strangely, I didn't feel anger or panic, just a cold, terrifying acceptance. I thought of my daughter, her laugh, her little hand holding mine. Then my wife's face appeared in my mind, smiling, completely unaware of what was happening to me. I felt tears roll down my face, not from pain, but from regret. Smoke was filling the car now, and breathing became harder. I could see flickers of orange light, maybe sparks, maybe fire. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I wanted to scream for help, but my voice wouldn't come out. My hands were shaking uncontrollably as I reached for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. Time slowed down. Everything felt suspended in slow motion. The sound of metal creaking, the hiss of steam, the smell of burning rubber. In the middle of all that chaos, a strange calm washed over me. I thought again about what I had always said. When you die, it's just over. And for the first time in my life, that thought terrified me. Then came a flash of light. Not from the headlights, not from the fire, but something bright and almost warm, as if it was coming from nowhere. My pain seemed to fade for a brief second, and I felt like I was floating, like I was being pulled away from the wreckage. My body was still there, trapped, but part of me felt like it was watching from outside. I heard a voice, clear, calm, but powerful. It didn't sound like anyone I knew, but it called me by my name. It said something I will never forget. Not yet. You still have something to do. In that moment, I felt tears streaming down my face again, but this time from a strange mix of fear and peace. Suddenly, there were hands on me, real hands. Paramedics had arrived, shouting instructions, breaking the glass, cutting the seatbelt. The light faded, and I was back in my body, screaming as they pulled me out of the twisted car. The pain came rushing back, but so did a single overwhelming thought. I was still alive. As they loaded me into the ambulance, I caught one last glimpse of the wreck. My car looked like nothing but crushed metal. There was no logical reason I should have survived. I closed my eyes as the sirens wailed, and for the first time in my life, I whispered a prayer. Not out of habit, not out of ritual, but out of raw desperation. I remember the exact moment it happened. 1 second I was trapped in my body, feeling the crushing weight of the dashboard on my legs, and the next I was free. It's hard to explain. I was still there, but not inside myself. I was hovering, weightless, looking down at the wreckage. I could see everything. The crumpled metal, the broken glass, and my own body, pale and still, like a lifeless mannequin. I felt no pain up there, no fear either. Just a strange clarity, as if I could finally see things as they really were. I could hear the paramedics yelling, their flashlights shining into the car. One of them shouted my name and checked my pulse. I wanted to answer, to tell them I was right there, but no sound came out. It was like my voice belonged to a different world. As I floated above the scene, I noticed details I shouldn't have been able to see. The license plate of the other car, the exact way one paramedic's hands were trembling, the worried face of a bystander calling 911, everything felt sharp, in high definition. I wasn't dreaming. I was fully aware, more awake than I had ever been. Then I looked at myself again, and something broke inside me. Seeing my own body like that, lifeless, helpless, made me realize how fragile I really was. All those years of thinking I was in control, that I didn't need God, that I could handle life on my own. They all crumbled in that instant. I wasn't in control of anything. A cold wind seemed to pass through me, and suddenly everything went quiet. The shouting, the sirens, the chaos, all of it faded. I felt myself pulled upward, higher and higher, as if some invisible force was taking me somewhere. It wasn't violent, but it was powerful. I didn't resist. I just let go. The higher I went, the more I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. It wasn't like sleep or numbness. It was warm, alive, almost like being embraced. I felt safe, completely safe, for the first time in my life. And then I heard it again. That same voice I had heard in the car. Firm but gentle, like it knew me better than I knew myself. It said my name again, slowly this time, like a parent calling a child. Then it said words I will never forget. It's not your time. Go back. I didn't want to go back, not after feeling this peace. But the voice was full of authority, and deep down I knew it was right. There was something left for me to do. Suddenly I was rushing downward. The peaceful light grew dim, the weight of the world returned, and I felt myself falling back into my broken body. Pain exploded everywhere at once. My chest, my legs, my head. I gasped for air like a drowning man breaking the surface. Someone shouted, "He's back!" And I realized my heart had stopped. I could hear everything now, the paramedics cheering, the sound of the defibrillator being turned off, the crackle of the radio as they called ahead to the hospital. Tears rolled down my face, but this time it wasn't just fear or pain. It was gratitude. Somehow I had been given a second chance. Lying there on the stretcher, staring up at the night sky as they carried me to the ambulance, I felt a strange mix of awe and terror. I knew what I had just experienced was real. I had been outside my body. I had heard a voice. And as much as I had mocked people of faith my whole life, I could no longer deny that someone was watching over me. One moment I was floating, weightless and calm, and the next, everything changed. The light that had surrounded me vanished, and I felt myself being pulled downward into something cold and heavy. It was as if the air itself disappeared. I couldn't breathe, though I wasn't even sure I had lungs where I was. The darkness was absolute. It wasn't just the absence of light. It was alive somehow, pressing in on me from every side. I couldn't see my body, couldn't see anything at all. All I could feel was a terrible weight, as if I was sinking deeper and deeper into an endless pit. At first, I tried to stay calm, telling myself this was just my brain shutting down, some kind of hallucination. But then the silence hit me, a silence so complete, so suffocating, that it felt like it was crushing my very soul. I had never felt so alone. Time seemed to stretch. I couldn't tell if I had been there for seconds or hours. The peace I had felt before was gone, replaced by a deep dread that grew stronger with every passing moment. I wanted to scream, to cry out for help, but no sound came. And then came the fear, a fear so deep it felt like it was eating me from the inside. It wasn't just fear of death, it was fear of being forgotten, erased, of ceasing to exist entirely. I realized that if this was eternity, I wanted no part of it. I thought about all the times I had mocked people who believed in God, the times I had laughed and said there was nothing after death. Now, standing or floating in that emptiness, my own words came back to haunt me. When you die, it's over. But what if this was the over? What if this was all there was? I don't know why I did it, but in that moment I called out. Not with my mouth, I didn't have one, but from somewhere deeper I said, God, if you're real, get me out of here, please. I had never prayed before, not seriously, but that cry was real, raw, desperate. And then, in the middle of that crushing darkness, something shifted. I felt warmth again, faint at first, like the glow of a candle in a huge empty room. Then it grew brighter, stronger, pushing back the darkness around me. The silence broke. I heard that same voice again, calm and steady, saying, "You are not alone." Those words were like oxygen. The fear melted away, replaced by a deep relief that made me feel like weeping. The light surrounded me, and suddenly I was rising, leaving the darkness behind. I woke up back in my body with tears running down my face. The paramedic was holding my hand, telling me I was going to be okay. And for the first time I believed him, because I knew I had been pulled out of something far worse than death. The fear grew until it became unbearable. I had never felt anything like it. My whole life, I had prided myself on being rational, logical, calm. But here, in this void, logic was useless. There were no explanations, no scientific formulas that could save me. There was only fear. Raw, primal fear that made me feel smaller than I ever had. I kept sinking into that endless blackness, as if gravity itself was dragging me deeper. My mind screamed for a way out. That was when a terrible thought struck me. What if I had been wrong all along? What if there really was a God? And this was what separation from him felt like. The thought hit me like a punch to the chest. All those years of mocking people of faith, of calling them weak, of laughing at the idea of heaven and hell. Now every word came rushing back. I couldn't escape them. They echoed in my head, louder and louder, until it felt like they were accusing me. I wanted to deny it, to hold on to my pride, but in that darkness, pride meant nothing. My arguments, my clever phrases, my intellectual superiority, all of it was worthless here. I was alone, completely and utterly alone, and for the first time in my life, I didn't want to be. I felt myself trembling, though I had no body to tremble with. A pressure built inside me, a desperation so strong I could no longer keep quiet. In that silence, I did something I never thought I would do. I cried out, not out loud, but from somewhere deep inside me. God, I said, if you're real, help me, please. I don't want this. I don't want to be here. The words shocked me even as I said them. For years I had insisted God didn't exist, but here, in this place, denying him felt impossible. For a moment, nothing happened. The darkness just pressed in tighter, suffocating me. I thought maybe my prayer had gone nowhere. Maybe it was too late. Maybe I had wasted my whole life, and now this was my punishment. The despair was so heavy it felt like I was being crushed. And then something changed. It started as the faintest glimmer far away, like a single star appearing in the night sky. I focused on it with everything I had. The light grew brighter, pushing the darkness back just enough for me to breathe, or whatever breathing meant in that place. I heard the voice again, gentle but full of power. You are not lost, it said. You are not forgotten. Tears filled me. Yes, even there I could feel them. I didn't know if it meant I would live, but in that moment, the fear eased just enough to give me hope. And then the pulling sensation returned, this time upward, not downward. The darkness fell away, and I felt warmth again, overwhelming warmth. I wasn't saved yet, but I knew something had changed. Something deep inside me had broken open, and for the first time I wanted to believe. He had been drifting for what felt like an eternity in that endless void, when suddenly a piercing brightness cut through the darkness. It wasn't like any light he had ever seen before. It was not harsh or blinding, but soft, warm, and impossibly pure. The moment it touched him, every ounce of fear he carried seemed to dissolve. His heart, which had been gripped by panic, felt strangely calm. It was as if the light was alive, reaching out to him, wrapping him in something beyond human understanding. He could feel it pulling him closer, not with force, but with a deep, irresistible invitation that filled him with peace. As he moved toward it, the silence of the void was replaced by a sense of presence, a presence so real that he almost forgot he no longer had a body. It was as though the light itself was aware of him, knew everything about him, yet wasn't condemning him. In that moment he felt fully seen, fully known, and still completely loved. All the years of pride, of mocking believers, of thinking he had all the answers, they all came rushing back to his mind. Yet instead of shame crushing him, he felt an overwhelming sense of forgiveness. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced, and he couldn't explain why, but he knew he was safe. The light grew brighter as he approached, until it surrounded him entirely. He could no longer see the darkness at all. It was gone, like it had never existed. Within that light, he began to feel as if he was standing in the presence of something holy. He couldn't see a figure, but he knew deep inside that this was not just energy or a near-death hallucination. This was personal. This was God. And at that realization, tears welled up within him, though he had no physical eyes to cry with. Then, as if the light could speak directly into his thoughts, he heard a voice. It wasn't loud, yet it shook him to his core. It was gentle, deep, and filled with a love that no human words could capture. The voice didn't accuse him of his mistakes. It didn't remind him of the years he had spent rejecting the idea of God. Instead, it simply said, "You still have a chance. Choose life." Those words hit him with such power that he felt something within him break. All his arrogance, all his excuses, all his disbelief. He wanted to stay in that light forever. The peace it gave him was more real than anything he had ever felt on earth. But at the same time, he began to sense that it wasn't time for him to remain there. The light was calling him to something greater, something he could only fulfill if he went back. It was as if he had been given a glimpse of eternity, but was now being sent back with a mission. As the light continued to surround him, he felt a strange pull, not frightening this time, but urgent. The warmth was still there, but he began to feel himself being drawn away from it. He wanted to resist, to stay where he was, but the voice repeated gently, "It is not yet your time. Go back." In the middle of that brilliant light, everything suddenly became still. The warmth remained, the peace remained, but now there was something even more personal, a presence so real it felt closer than his own thoughts. Then he heard it, his name, not just a sound, but a voice that seemed to resonate through every part of who he was. It was firm yet impossibly tender, like it carried the weight of both justice and mercy at the same time. He froze, not out of fear, but out of awe. Never in his life had he felt so small, and yet so deeply valued. The voice spoke again, slowly and clearly, and each word felt like it was being written on his soul. "It's not your time yet. I'm giving you a second chance." He couldn't explain why, but he knew this wasn't just about survival. This was about purpose. These words weren't telling him merely to live longer, but to live differently. He felt as if the God he had mocked for years was now reaching out, offering him mercy instead of punishment. It broke something deep inside of him. He wanted to respond, to say something, anything, but he had no mouth, no body, only thoughts, and yet somehow he knew the voice could hear him. With everything in him, he whispered in his heart, "Thank you." It was the first, truly sincere prayer he had ever prayed in his life. And though he couldn't see a face, he felt the presence respond with even greater love, as though heaven itself was rejoicing. The light began to shift around him, not fading, but moving, like it was guiding him somewhere else. He felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude and a strange determination rising within him. He didn't know what this second chance would look like, but he knew he couldn't waste it. For the first time in years, he felt hope, not the kind that comes from money, success, or human effort, but a hope rooted in something eternal. And then, as quickly as it had all begun, the experience started to slip away. The light grew distant, the warmth began to fade, and he felt as if he was being pulled backward through time and space. There was no panic this time, just a quiet certainty that he was being sent back with a mission. His last thought before the light vanished completely was simple and profound. I won't be the same. His eyes shot open, and for a moment he didn't know where he was. The bright fluorescent lights above him stung his eyes, and the loud beeping of machines filled his ears. It felt like waking up from the most vivid dream of his life, except this wasn't a dream. He could feel the weight of the oxygen mask on his face, the stiffness of the hospital sheets, and the dull ache running through every bone in his body. He blinked several times, trying to focus, until he saw nurses staring at him with shock written all over their faces. One nurse ran out of the room to call the doctor, while another quickly checked his pulse, shaking her head as if she couldn't believe what she was feeling. He could see the look of pure astonishment in their eyes. This was not supposed to be happening. A few minutes later, the doctor walked in, his face pale and serious. "You're awake?" he said slowly, almost as if asking himself, This is impossible." The doctor explained what had happened, though the man was barely able to process it all. His heart had stopped for several minutes. The car accident had been so severe that they had almost declared him dead at the scene. Even if someone did survive such an impact, the doctor said, they should have been in a coma or severely brain damaged, not awake, alert, and talking. "There's no medical explanation for this," the doctor finally admitted, shaking his head. Tears welled up in his eyes as he remembered the last thing he had seen before waking up, the blinding warm light and the voice calling his name. It was still so fresh, so clear, like it had happened seconds ago. "It's not your time yet. I'm giving you a second chance." Those words echoed in his mind over and over. This wasn't just survival. It felt like a purpose had been given to him, like he had been sent back for a reason he didn't yet understand. When his wife rushed into the room, she nearly collapsed from relief. She grabbed his hand and sobbed uncontrollably, saying that the doctors had told her there was no hope. He looked into her tear-streaked face and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He wasn't supposed to be here, but he was, and that meant he still had time to love her, to be a better husband, to be a better father. Then came the moment that broke him completely. His daughter peeked into the room, clutching a stuffed animal. She had been told that her daddy might not come home again, and yet here he was. The man felt something deep in his chest, something he had never felt before, a mixture of joy, humility, and a strange, holy fear. He realized that the second chance he had been given wasn't just for him, but for them. Later that night, as the hospital room grew quiet, he lay awake replaying everything in his mind. He had always believed that when you die, it's over, that there's nothing waiting for you. But what he experienced was not nothing. It was more real than anything he had ever known. He had felt peace. He had heard a voice, and now he was alive against all odds. He closed his eyes and whispered softly to himself, almost afraid to say the words out loud, "Thank you." He wasn't sure exactly who he was talking to. He had spent his whole life denying that God even existed, but deep down he knew. This was no coincidence, no lucky break, no random chance. Someone had brought him back. The next morning, the doctor came back to check on him and still looked baffled. "You're a walking miracle," he said quietly. "You should thank whoever you believe in, because science can't explain this." For the first time in his life, the man didn't scoff or roll his eyes at a statement like that. He just nodded, tears filling his eyes, because he knew exactly who had saved him. As he lay there, he made a quiet promise in his heart. He would never forget what had happened. He had been given a second chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. This moment marked the beginning of a new life, one where he could no longer deny what he had seen, what he had felt, and what he now knew to be true. God was real, and he had saved him for a reason. When I finally left the hospital, people expected me to just move on with my life and be grateful. And yes, I was grateful, but deep inside, something was unsettled. I couldn't shake the memory of that light, that voice, that overwhelming peace that didn't feel like a dream. For years I had laughed at believers, calling them delusional. Yet I couldn't explain what had happened to me. The doctors had no answers, science had no answers, and for the first time in my life, I couldn't hide behind logic. I was staring at a mystery too big to ignore. Every night I lay awake, replaying the accident in my mind. I remembered the crushing sound of metal, the feeling of my body leaving me, the cold emptiness of the void, and then the warmth of the light that embraced me. I remembered the voice, so full of love, saying my name, telling me it wasn't my time. The more I thought about it, the more restless I became. I had always believed life ended in darkness, nothing more, but I hadn't experienced nothingness. I had experienced someone. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was just my brain firing off chemicals. Maybe it was trauma-induced hallucinations. Maybe it was wishful thinking in the face of death. That's what the old me would have said. But every time I leaned on those excuses, they felt flimsy, like paper shields against a hurricane. The experience was too vivid, too personal, too intentional. Hallucinations don't call you by your name. Hallucinations don't fill you with peace when you're surrounded by chaos. The hardest part was admitting that I could be wrong. Pride had been my armor for so long, and now it felt like that armor was cracking. I thought about all the times I mocked Christians at work, the debates I had where I arrogantly declared, "When you die, it's over." Now, how could I even say those words? I had seen something else. I had felt the presence of something beyond me, and no argument, no theory, no scientific explanation could erase that. Sometimes I would sit in silence, just staring at my daughter playing on the floor, and the thought would hit me like a tidal wave. I almost lost this. I almost lost her. If I had died in that crash, what would she remember of me? A father who laughed at God, who dismissed faith, who believed in nothing but himself? Or could this second chance mean I was supposed to become someone different, someone she could look up to not just for strength but for faith? Conversations became harder too. Friends would say, "You're so lucky, man, you beat death." And I would nod. But inside I wanted to scream, "No, it wasn't luck." I knew what I had seen, but how could I explain it without sounding crazy? How could I tell them that the God I denied all my life had saved me, had given me back my breath, my heartbeat, my family? I stayed quiet most of the time, but the truth burned inside me like fire I couldn't put out. My wife noticed the change in me before anyone else. She saw the way I would pause before speaking, the way I looked at her and our daughter with new eyes, like I was seeing them for the first time. One night, she asked softly, "You saw something, didn't you?" I couldn't hold it in anymore. I told her everything, every detail, every word, every tear, and when I finished, she didn't laugh or doubt me. She just held me and whispered, "Maybe God's been waiting for you to see him all along." That sentence hit me harder than the crash ever did. Waiting for me? Could that really be true? Had God been watching my whole life, even when I mocked him, even when I spat on the very idea of him? The thought humbled me in ways I can't explain. I felt small, broken, and yet strangely loved. If God had really been waiting for me, then why? Why save me of all people? Why give me another chance when I had spent my life denying him? The days that followed were a storm inside me. Part of me wanted to cling to my old identity, the strong, logical man who didn't need faith. But another part of me, the part that had seen the light and heard the voice, knew I couldn't go back. Once you've tasted something that real, you can't pretend it didn't happen. The accident hadn't just broken my body, it had broken my pride. And in its place, something new was stirring. Something fragile, something sacred. I didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. That moment in the hospital wasn't just a miracle of survival, it was an invitation, a call to step into a life I had never imagined. I had been given a second chance, not just to breathe again, but to believe. And the truth was, I couldn't run from it anymore. The impact of that night had changed me forever. In the weeks after the accident, I noticed my thoughts drifting in a direction they never had before. I found myself reflecting on God, on life, on the things I had mocked so easily in the past. For years, the Bible had been nothing but a dusty old book to me, something weak people clung to when they couldn't face reality. But now, for the first time, I actually wondered if that book held truths I had been blind to. I felt a tug in my heart that I couldn't dismiss. Something was changing inside me. I began to remember all the verses people had quoted to me over the years, words I used to laugh at. Suddenly, they echoed in my mind with a new weight, as if God himself was bringing them back to my memory. I had always argued that faith was for the ignorant, but now I was the one feeling ignorant. I had lived as if knowledge and science were enough, but in the moment I faced death, they gave me nothing. It was God who reached out to me in the darkness, not medicine or logic. The arrogance that once defined me started to crumble. I had been so proud, so certain that I had all the answers, but the more I thought about what I had experienced, the more I realized how small I really was. I wasn't in control of my life, not in the way I always claimed to be. One car, 1 second, and everything I had built could have been gone. That realization humbled me in a way no debate or lecture ever could. Instead of boasting about how strong and independent I was, I began to feel thankful for things I had taken for granted. Waking up in the morning felt like a gift. Hearing my daughter's laughter sounded like music. Even the pain in my body from the accident became a reminder that I was still alive, still breathing, still here for a reason. Gratitude slowly replaced the pride that had once lived at the center of my heart. My wife noticed it first. She would catch me pausing before meals, just staring at the food, lost in thought. One night she asked, "Are you praying?" I didn't even realize what I was doing until she said it. I wasn't reciting words or repeating a ritual, but deep inside I was beginning to acknowledge someone greater than me. It wasn't formal, but it was real. A quiet whisper of thanks that rose from a heart-learning humility. There were moments when my old self tried to push back. Pride would creep in, reminding me of who I used to be, urging me to explain everything away with science. But the truth was too heavy to ignore. I couldn't unhear the voice that spoke my name. I couldn't unfeel the warmth of the light that pulled me from the void. Every time I doubted, those memories came rushing back, grounding me in the truth I had experienced. I also began to notice people differently. In the past, I judged believers as weak, but now I saw strength in their faith, a strength I had lacked all along. I thought about my Christian colleagues and the peace they always seemed to carry. I used to think they were naive, but maybe they had something I desperately needed. For the first time, I didn't look down on them. I admired them. This transformation didn't happen overnight. It was slow, quiet, like the breaking of dawn after a long night. Each day, I found myself less interested in proving others wrong and more interested in searching for truth. I was no longer satisfied with empty pride or shallow explanations. I wanted to know who God really was. I wanted to understand why he spared me. I wanted to discover what he was calling me to do with this second chance. Humility became the lens through which I started to see my life. I realized how little control I had, and instead of fighting it, I began to accept it. There was peace in surrender, peace in admitting I wasn't the master of my fate. Gratitude filled the spaces where arrogance used to live, and every day I felt like I was being remade from the inside out. It was as if God was softening a heart that had once been made of stone. Looking back, I know that night on the road broke more than my body. It broke my pride. It shattered the walls I had built around my heart for years. and as painful as it was, I wouldn't trade it for anything. Because in the breaking, God planted something new, faith. What started as a terrifying accident became the turning point of my life, the moment my heart began to change forever. When he opened his eyes each morning now, the world no longer felt the same. The colors outside his window appeared brighter, the air seemed fresher, and even the smallest details carried weight. He no longer saw his survival as something accidental or random. It was clear to him that his life had been spared for a reason. For years, he had walked with bitterness, anger, and skepticism. But those chains had been broken in a single moment of grace. Now, instead of questioning why he was alive, he asked what he should do with the time given to him. That shift alone brought him a peace he had never experienced. The burden of his old pride was lifting day by day. Gratitude began replacing complaint, and humility started shaping his steps. Slowly, his entire perspective of life was changing. The Bible, once just a book he mocked and dismissed, became a lifeline in his hands. He read each page with hunger, not simply for knowledge but for understanding. Stories he had once considered outdated suddenly came alive with meaning and power. The words seemed to speak directly to his heart, addressing his doubts, fears, and even his past mistakes. He realized how blind he had been, ignoring a truth that had always been available to him. Each verse felt like a light, guiding him out of the darkness he had chosen to live in. Sometimes tears rolled down his face as he recognized his own arrogance reflected in the pages. Yet with those tears came healing. He wasn't condemned, he was forgiven. And that forgiveness gave him the courage to start again. Prayer was new to him. At first he stumbled, not knowing what words to say. He felt unworthy, embarrassed even, to address God directly. But with each attempt, his heart softened. Soon it was no longer about saying the right words, it was about being honest. He spoke to God with the same rawness he once used in arguments, but this time it was different. Instead of shouting in defiance, he opened up in humility. He confessed his mistakes, his anger, and the years he had wasted. And to his surprise, he felt no rejection, no silence, only a presence that reassured him he was heard. That presence began to comfort him in ways nothing else could. Prayer became not an obligation, but a refuge. It was his lifeline, his anchor in this new journey. The transformation was slow but undeniable. Old habits tugged at him, trying to drag him back into the life he once lived. Pride whispered, doubts shouted, and temptations waited at every corner. Yet something inside him had shifted permanently. He no longer wanted to live for himself alone. The pleasures and anger that once ruled his heart seemed empty now. He started to notice that humility brought him more peace than arrogance ever did. Gratitude gave him more joy than complaining ever had, and forgiveness, even forgiving those who hurt him, gave him more freedom than revenge. He realized that true strength wasn't in proving others wrong, but in walking humbly before God. That was a strength he had never known before, and it gave him courage to continue. His relationships began to change as well. People who had once known him as proud and stubborn started noticing something different. He spoke with more patience, listened with more care, and responded with kindness rather than anger. Some were surprised, others skeptical, but all could see that something profound had happened within him. It wasn't about trying to impress anyone. It was genuine. For the first time, he cared more about love than about being right. He saw his past mistakes in how he treated others and felt a deep urge to make things right where he could. Apologies, once impossible for him, now flowed freely. He no longer feared appearing weak. Instead, he discovered that humility was a far greater strength, and that change left an impression on everyone around him. He often reflected on the night his heart had stopped. 3 minutes without life had turned into a lifetime of transformation. That moment replayed in his mind, but not with fear anymore, with gratitude. He realized that what he had experienced was not just a brush with death, but an invitation to live differently. It was as if God had shaken him awake, saying, "Your time is not over, but it must change." That thought humbled him deeply. He could have been gone, remembered only for his stubborn pride. Instead, he was alive with the chance to leave behind a different legacy. Every breath became a reminder that he was living on borrowed time, gifted to him not to waste, but to use for something greater. As days turned into weeks, his hunger for God only grew stronger. He no longer searched for meaning in temporary pleasures or hollow victories. The Bible became his daily food, and prayer became his daily conversation. Faith was no longer something distant or irrelevant. It became the core of who he was. Each promise of Scripture felt like it was written directly for him. Each story of redemption reminded him that he too was being redeemed. The arrogance that once blinded him to these truths had melted away, replaced by humility and awe. Even in moments of struggle, he found himself turning back to God rather than away. That was the greatest evidence of change. His heart no longer ran from truth, but towards it. He realized that life's purpose was not about accumulating wealth, achievements, or recognition. It was about living in alignment with the one who had given him a second chance. The desire to serve others, to show compassion, and to share his story became stronger each day. He understood now that his pain had not been wasted. Every scar, every regret, every mistake, all of it had led him to this point of surrender. And in surrender, he found the strength he had always lacked. He no longer felt the need to control everything. Instead, he trusted God's plan, even when it didn't make sense. That trust gave him peace, even in uncertainty. His new life was not easier, but it was richer, deeper, and filled with purpose. Sometimes he would sit in silence and think about the man he used to be. The arrogance, the anger, the constant resistance to faith, it all seemed like another lifetime. He almost didn't recognize himself in those memories. And yet, he carried them not with shame, but with gratitude. For without those struggles, he might never have understood the depth of God's grace. His past became a testimony, a reminder of how far he had been lifted. He knew others who were still living in that same arrogance, and his heart longed for them to experience the same change. He prayed that his story would one day give them hope, that they would see that transformation was possible no matter how stubborn the heart. In the end, his new life was not about perfection, but about direction. He was walking a different path now, one guided by faith, humility, and gratitude. Each day brought new challenges, but also new mercies. He no longer lived in fear of death because he understood that life itself was a gift from God. That understanding gave him freedom. He had been given a second chance, and he refused to waste it. His story was no longer about arrogance and defiance, but about redemption and grace. And as he looked toward the future, he carried one certainty above all. His life had been spared for a greater purpose, and he would spend the rest of his days living it out. He never imagined that one day his greatest pride would not be in his achievements, but in his testimony. What once embarrassed him to speak about, his doubts, his anger, his arrogance, had now become the very foundation of his story. He realized that his survival was not just for his own benefit, but for the sake of others who might still be walking in the same darkness he once embraced. Sharing his experience was not easy at first. The vulnerability made him feel exposed. Yet every time he spoke, he saw lives touched. People leaned in, listening with tears in their eyes. They could see themselves in his struggle, and through his testimony, they could also see the hope of change. He spoke about the night when life left his body, and silence surrounded him. He described the peace that overcame him and the voice that called his name, offering him a second chance. Those words still echoed in his soul. "It's not your time yet." They were not just a statement of survival, but a declaration of purpose. And when he shared this, people listened differently. They knew this was not theory, not philosophy, it was lived reality. He had been where many feared to go, the edge of death, and from that place he returned with a message. His testimony carried weight, because it was born in the valley of shadows. Whenever he told his story, he reminded others that God does not waste pain. He would say, "If he gave me a second chance, then no one is too far gone." For him, the accident that nearly claimed his life had become the turning point that gave him true life. He didn't glorify the suffering or the near-death moment, but he glorified the God who met him there. His humility made his words powerful, not polished speeches, but raw confessions of a man who had once been blind and now could see. And in that honesty, people found hope. They realized that their brokenness could also be transformed into a testimony. His story spread further than he expected. At first, it was shared among friends and family, but soon invitations came from churches, community gatherings, and even hospitals where people were struggling with despair. Every time he walked into a room, he saw faces marked by pain, fear, or doubt, faces that reminded him of who he once was. And each time he began the same way. "I was a man who didn't believe until God himself showed me grace." Those simple words often broke down walls in people's hearts. They understood that he wasn't a preacher by profession. He was a man who had lived through what many feared most. And that gave his message authenticity. He became passionate about speaking not only of God's power to save lives, but also his power to transform them. He would tell people surviving was just the beginning. The real miracle is what God did with my heart. That message resonated deeply. People realized that miracles were not just about escaping death, but about finding new life. He testified that even though his body had been broken, his soul had been healed. And that kind of healing was available to anyone willing to surrender. His testimony was living proof that transformation was possible, even for the most resistant heart. The most humbling part of sharing his testimony was seeing others take steps of faith. Men and women who had carried skepticism for years began asking questions, seeking answers, and even opening the Bible for the first time. Some approached him afterward saying, "If God could change you, maybe he can change me too." Those words filled him with gratitude. He knew his story was not about making himself look strong, but about pointing others to the one who had given him strength. Every time someone found hope through his testimony, he felt that his survival had not been in vain. In quiet moments, he still remembered the weight of those 3 minutes when his heart had stopped. But now, he saw them as a gift, not a curse. They were the threshold that separated his old life from his new one. He often told people, "God met me at my weakest moment, when I had nothing left to give." That truth resonated with so many who felt unworthy of God's love. His testimony became a reminder that grace meets people not at their best, but at their lowest. And if God could meet him in the valley of death, then surely he could meet anyone in their valley too. As the years went by, his testimony became less about an event and more about a lifestyle. He didn't just share what happened once. He shared what God was continuing to do in his life. Each new challenge, each new blessing, each act of mercy became part of his story. He wanted people to know that faith wasn't only about a dramatic encounter, it was about daily trust. His near-death experience had been the spark, but the flame was kept alive through consistent surrender. That was what he wanted others to see, that God's work didn't end with saving him. It continued every single day. He often closed his testimony with a reminder. Don't wait for tragedy to wake you up. Don't wait until you're lying in the valley of death to see that life is precious. He would urge people to seek God now, in the midst of their ordinary days. He spoke with urgency, not to scare, but to awaken hearts. He knew what it was like to waste years in pride, and he didn't want anyone else to lose that time. His testimony wasn't about fear of death. It was about hope for life, hope that came from a God who gives second chances even when we least deserve them. And so, his life became a living testimony. Everywhere he went, his words carried the weight of truth because they were forged in fire. He no longer sought recognition, wealth, or status. His only desire was to point others to the God who had rescued him. Until his last breath, he would keep telling the story that even in the valley of death, God's hand can reach down, lift you up, and give you a second chance. His testimony was not about him, it was about the one who never abandoned him. And in that truth, he found his greatest purpose, to be a witness of grace, so that others too might find life. There are moments in life that change us forever, moments when the ground beneath us crumbles and everything we thought we knew is shaken. For me, it took a car crash, 3 minutes of silence, and a voice that broke through the darkness to open my eyes. I used to believe that death was the end, that life was nothing more than chance and logic. But standing at the edge of eternity, I learned the truth. There is more. There is a God who sees us, who calls us by name, and who gives second chances. Looking back now, I realize how blind I was. I mocked faith, laughed at prayer, and thought myself wiser than those who trusted in God. Yet in the very moment when I had no control, when my body was broken and my soul stood naked before eternity, it wasn't science that reached me. It was grace. A grace I did not deserve, but one I can never deny. If there's anything my story can teach, it's this. Don't wait until you are standing at the edge of death to ask the questions of life. Don't wait until you have nothing left to wonder if God is real. He is real, and He loves you more than you could ever imagine. I am living proof of that love, not because I earned it, but because He gave it freely. My life today is no longer about pride, wealth, or status. It's about gratitude. Every breath I take is a reminder of mercy. Every day I wake up is a second chance, and I share my story, not to point to myself, but to point to Him, the one who lifted me out of the darkness and gave me light. So if you hear my testimony today, let it be more than just another story. Let it be a call, a reminder that even in the valley of death, God is present, that even when hope seems gone, His hand is still reaching, that even when you feel unworthy, His love is still enough. I should not be here, but by His grace I am. And so I will spend the rest of my days telling the truth. God is real, He is near, and He can change your life too.